Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Lauren Bell, and I'm the Education and Community Outreach Coordinator at the Invasive Species Centre, and I manage the Early Detection and Rapid Response Network here at the Invasive Species Centre. Today's webinar is titled Eastern Ontario EDRR Network Introduction Webinar, so that's the EDRR stands for Early Detection and Rapid Response Network. Before we start, just want to cover off some logistics. All attendees are in listen-only mode now, so if you have any questions at all during the webinar, please just put it into the question box on the right-hand side of the screen. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll have the recorded available to view on our Invasive Species Centre YouTube page following the webinar, so keep an eye out for that. So the goal of this webinar is to introduce our EDRR program to organizations and groups that are established in Eastern Ontario. And we're doing this so that we can see how we can work together and we can use this program to help fill some information and resource gaps in Eastern Ontario. So for today's webinar, we're going to discuss a little bit of an introduction to some of the partners in this program. We're going to talk about what is the EDRR network, how you can get involved, talk a little bit about our new Eastern Ontario expansion. Fill the Gaps Partner Survey is one of the outcomes that we'll be talking about from this webinar. And then at the end, we're going to have some time for questions. So it's not going to follow necessarily the classic webinar format because we're going to have a lot of time at the end for some questions and hopefully some good discussion. So before we introduce the program, I just wanted to first introduce some of the partners that help run this project. So a little bit of background, and we'll be doing a really good deep dive into the EDRR network as the bulk of this presentation. But before we get started, I just wanted to mention a little bit of background. The EDRR network is coordinated and housed at the Invasive Species Centre up here in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. And we've been hosting this program since its inception in 2015. The program has been funded by the Ontario Trillium Foundation since 2015, and our Eastern Ontario expansion is made possible thanks to a GROW grant from the Ontario Trillium Foundation. This project is implemented through a coordinated effort between the Invasive Species Centre and our founding partners at the Ontario Invasive Plant Council, as well as our new local partners at the Eastern Ontario Model Forest. So now I'm just going to take an opportunity to introduce the Invasive Species Centre and a little bit about what we do here at the Centre and how we're involved with the network. So if you're not familiar with us, the Invasive Species Centre, we are a nonprofit organization founded in 2011 by several different levels of government and government agencies, but we are a non-governmental organization. So we're a nonprofit, non-governmental organization. Our headquarters are here in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and we also have some satellite offices in London, Ontario, and in Peterborough. The Invasive Species Centre's goal is to prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species in Canada and to act as a hub for science, education, and outreach when it comes to invasive species. So maybe you've heard of the Invasive Species Centre, and maybe not, but you might have heard of some of our programs that we offer. So for example, we have our Asian Carp Canada program, the EDRR program, which we'll be talking about today, our forest invasives, the International Conference on Aquatic Invasive Species, our corporate communications under the Invasive Species Centre umbrella, our Ontario programs run through the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, as well as our insect and zooplankton diagnostics with the Ministry of Forestry as well. And so with that, I'm now going to pass it over and welcome one of our project partners, Jim Hendry, to introduce the Eastern Ontario Model Forest. Jim is the Forest Certification Coordinator at the Eastern Ontario Model Forest, and he's going to give us a little bit of background. So over to you, Jim.
Okay, thanks, Lauren, and good afternoon, everyone. Before I get started, Lauren, how's the audio?
It sounds great.
Great, okay. So a bit about the Eastern Ontario Model Forest, and then I'll talk a bit about our programs that we undertake. So we are a not-for-profit, non-governmental charitable organization, and it was founded in 1993. The organization is governed by a board of directors, and these board of directors include private landowners, community forest managers, First Nations representative, and forest industry representatives as well. But our primary clients are private and community forest owners in Ontario and beyond Eastern Ontario as well. And I'll explain that a little bit later. So we work with private landowners, we work with First Nations community, government, federal, provincial, industry, and non-industry organizations. But our primary goal is to advance private land forestry and sustainable forest management of these forests. And we take in terms of sustainable forest management, both with economic, social, and environmental health for the local communities is at the core of our objectives. We have 4 main program areas, and I'll talk briefly about each one. The first one is forest education and outreach, and we have 2 featured events that help us deliver on that particular program area, and that's the Temple Woodlot Conference and the December Forest Seminar. Both of these events are open to the public, open to private landowners and beyond that, and their focus is around forest issues covering many topics. We've also addressed within that program First Nations cultural awareness workshops, training opportunities, guided forestry tours in partnership with our community forest and private land partners, and many special projects. One on the filming of history of forestry in Ontario. You may have heard of it, Trees, Youth, and Our Future, as well as many other topics. And with these programs, over the past 20 plus years, we've reached over 20,000 landowners plus. The forest certification program, this was achieved in 2003. And this is a group certificate, a forest manager group certificate. And the system that we use is the Forest Stewardship Council, FSC is the acronym. And this system of certification, group certification, provides a efficient and supportive and a low-cost way for small private landowners, whether they be individual private landowner or community forest, to enter into a certification system. Today, we have over 74,000 hectares certified, again, in private and community forest and commercial forests, and a number of maple syrup producers. And in total, this represents 120 different landowners across the province, from all the way from the Quebec border down into the Bruce, over to the Bruce Peninsula and down into Niagara Falls. So much more beyond our name of Eastern Ontario Model Forest. The third program that we offer is a community forest carbon offset program. This program at this point in time is specific just to community forests greater than 2,000 hectares. And it's a way to verify the carbon on the forest and then bring it to market and realize financial benefit from sustainable forest management. And at this point in time, we have 2 forests that are developing carbon offset programs, and they are Bruce County and Quinte Conservation. And then finally, our final program is the Forest Health Network, which obviously is much directed or closely aligned with this particular project. And this is a network that brings forest managers, private landowners together to share experiences, to share expertise around forest health issues, to coordinate and deliver communication products, and also to work closely with federal governments, provincial governments, and other nonprofit agencies to get the word out and to get it out with practical solutions. And this network involves, or includes, I should say, 20 different organizations spanning Eastern Ontario, Western Quebec, and Northern New York State. And then finally, if you would like more information and more contact information as well, you can visit our website, eomf.on.ca. Look forward to your questions later in the webinar. Back to you, Lauren.
Great, thank you so much, Jim. I'm now going to pass it over to Vicki Simkovic to introduce our other project partner and our original project partner since 2015, the Ontario Invasive Plant Council. Vicki is a coordinator at the Ontario Invasive Plant Council and will give a little bit of background. Over to you, Vicki.
Great, thanks very much, Lauren. And you can hear me fine?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, great. So to start with an introduction, the OIPC is a nonprofit organization whose vision is to provide leadership, expertise, and a forum to engage and empower Ontarians to take action on invasive plant issues. We were formed in 2007 by a group of passionate individuals who saw the need for a coordinated provincial response to the growing threat of invasive plants. We maintain an extensive network of invasive plant managers and experts across the province, including all levels of government and non-government, municipalities, conservation authorities, Indigenous groups, industry such as landscape and nursery retailers, and academics. And we also have a board of directors that meets regularly. We provide expert information on how to manage invasive plants through our published documents, such as our best management practice guides that are very popular for individual invasive plants. And currently we have BMPs for 23 different species. We also have our Grow Me Instead guide, which encourages the use of non-invasive garden alternatives. And we conduct outreach initiatives such as webinars and workshops, and many of our webinars are posted on our website along with many other resources. We also host our annual AGM and conference every year in the fall. We have 2 active province-wide committees as well on specific invasive plant issues, which include the Ontario Phragmites Working Group and the Horticultural Outreach Collaborative. The OIPC envisions Ontario's environment, economy, and society protected from the adverse impacts of invasive plants. And if you would like more information, you can go to our website up here at the top, ontarioinvasiveplants.ca. And we also have several social media outlets as well: Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and YouTube. All right.
Great, thank you, Vicki. Both Vicki and Jim will be joining us for the question period at the end. So if you have any questions directed to either person in particular, please just specify who your question's for in the question box. So that's a little bit of background about our partners. Now to take a step back a little bit and talk a little bit about what actually is an invasive species and what are the concerns here. So an invasive species is considered when, as you can see here, it's introduced to an ecosystem outside of its native range. And then the second point, has the potential impacts on either the ecology, the economy, or the society within that introduced range. So this second part is really the most important part. A species is not inherently invasive if it's introduced outside of its native range. It has to have this second step. So it must cause harm to at least one of these pillars. So those pillars being ecology, economy, or society within that introduced range. And typically an invasive species causes harm to all 3. So invasive species can often have similar characteristics as we look at them across different taxa, but some of these characteristics that are kind of wide-reaching across all invasive species can include they're fast-growing and reproducing really quickly. There's a lack of natural predators that would typically inhibit their spread if we were to go to the native range, and we don't see those same predators existing in the introduced range. And they target native species that have a lack of defense mechanisms in them. And these are just a couple. So to bring this idea of invasive species into a more Ontario-specific context, which is where we work with the EDRR network, these are some of the numbers that we're dealing with. So unfortunately, Ontario does have the most invasive species compared to any other Canadian province or territory. We have a large population located in a small part of the province, lots of ports of entry, so there's a lot of different vectors which could be spreading invasive species. So unfortunately, we do hold that first place position. There's 440 known invasive plants, 39 known or potential invasive forest insects, 10 invasive tree diseases, and 180 non-native and invasive species in the Great Lakes that are known. So those are some pretty large numbers that we're working with here in Ontario. Now let's kind of get into the meat of what this presentation is going to be about, and let's introduce the program. So the program that we're introducing today is the Early Detection and Rapid Response Network Ontario, so EDRR. What is the Early Detection and Rapid Response Network? I mentioned it's coordinated by the Invasive Species Centre, and it was started in 2015. And this is coordinated in partnership with our various partners throughout the years, with Ontario Invasive Plant Council being our core partner since day one. The idea here is it's a community action network that's aimed at training citizens of Ontario on how to detect, report, and respond to invasive species in Ontario. It's an eyes-on-the-ground approach to stopping new introductions or to inhibiting further spread of invasive species throughout the province. And it's this idea of slowing the spread of invasive species by targeting one community at a time. So what kind of work do we do? We cover a lot of different areas of work, so I'm just going to kind of go through with some examples of some of the past work that we've conducted. So we've done training that includes in-person workshops, field tours, and as of 2020, we've started doing digital training. It's not an avenue we'd explored much in the past, but now due to circumstances, we are switching to a bit more digital training and seeing some great success there. We do identification and development of landowner management plans, so helping you create a plan using existing resources like Vicki mentioned. There's a lot of different resources available, a lot of them through the Plant Council. And so we work with landowners to help manage their invasive plants through education and resources available. We help coordinate stewardship removals with local organizations and volunteers. This photo here is from the Sault Ste. Marie annual garlic mustard pull. We're in our 6th year of the garlic mustard pull, with a bit of changes happening this year, of course, under circumstances, but a really important initiative here in Sault Ste. Marie. So I think it's important to take a second here to note that these are targeted removals on public land. So this is where focus on stewardship species is taken, those that are species that can be removed by volunteers. So this is typically done in coordination with a local organization in the Eastern Ontario area in this case. And it's really important to note that this is a question we get quite a bit. The EDRR network is all about education and volunteer opportunities and community outreach. So we don't offer removal services or herbicide application for private landowners, but we can help direct you to those services and be that link for getting those services and helping create those management plans. So our removal, as far as the network is concerned, is focused on sites of community concern and species that can be targeted by volunteers. And that's where we're hoping local organizations can help link us to those appropriate sites. Other items that we do, we speak at events and conferences. We hold booths to help engage the public and professionals. This year's outreach, as I mentioned, it'll look a little bit different, but there will still be a ton of opportunities for education and training. We do invasive species surveying with government partners. We do citizen science and data collection on training and outreach. The platform that we use is called EDMAPS, or Early Detection Distribution Mapping System, which we use here in Ontario and is housed out of the Invading Species Awareness Program. So we can opportunity to have more discussions and training on that. We do resource production and dissemination, as well as responding to public inquiries. So we can be that link. If there's inquiries in your community that you know of, you can send them to the EDRR network and we can help facilitate those answers. So the EDRR network focuses on all taxa. You'll notice at the beginning when we talked about some of the programs at the Invasive Species Centre, some are focused on a certain area, such as Asian carp or forest invasives. The EDRR network does focus on all taxa, and we do take community needs into consideration when developing our training materials. So it's really important that the network reflects the concerns of the area that we're moving into. And that's partly why we're doing this webinar here to kick off our expansion today. Our goal is to help fill invasive species knowledge and tool gaps within your community and to help inform people of incoming threats. So maybe there's a couple species on our doorstep that we're not currently aware of as communities, and we try to bring in that expertise and knowledge to help facilitate those early steps, those really important steps to mitigate the spread of invasive species coming in. We also link partners with invasive species resources, our volunteer network base, and other needs. So we're sort of wide-reaching, a bit of a catch-all, but that just means there's a lot of opportunities for engagement. We do work with everyone, so that includes concerned citizens. We work with industry, government, naturalist groups, other nonprofit groups, First Nations. We work with anyone that's interested in working with us. So to kind of sum it up, in a nutshell, I think that I would summarize our overarching goal as to provide the tools, training, and resources necessary to help slow the spread and introduction of invasive species in Ontario. And our greatest focus overall is on that education and outreach component, which I think you can kind of see with some of the past work that we've done. So now that we've introduced the project a little bit, I want to take a second to talk about the why. Why do we have such a heavy focus on training people across Ontario about invasive species? We talked a little bit about why an invasive species is, what it is and why it's important, but I think it's an opportunity to discuss why this network has been important in the past and why we think it's going to be an excellent opportunity to expand out east. So this graphic here depicts the invasion curve. And this is the idea of the cost and likelihood of eradication over time of an invasive species after it's introduced, before and after it's introduced. So the most important phase of the invasion curve that we focus on is here at the species arrival, both before and at species arrival, so in the prevention phase. So if the most important phase to reduce harm caused by invasive species is before or at species arrival. So the earlier a detection is, the better, and therefore that more eyes on the ground, the better. So you can be out and you can be out in the field for your own reasons. Sometimes we target groups that are walking groups. Sometimes we target industry professionals, logging companies, arborists, etc. So everyone is out enjoying the outdoors or working outdoors with their own reasons. But the idea here is that you have invasive species knowledge in your back pocket, and you can have those early symptoms and signs and know that, so that when you see it out in the, for whatever reason that you're outdoors, you can be that first detection, and that important kind of citizen science can come from trained citizens. So that's this idea of eyes on the ground. The more eyes on the ground, the better. So we want to work together to help amplify training and education, outreach, and then ultimately create more eyes on the ground looking for invasive species in whatever context you might be out. So this slide just depicts some of our current stats since we began in 2015. So some of our numbers are projected here. We've had 183 training workshops, presentations, plant removals, and surveys as part of our outreach initiative. We have to date had 16,850 people engaged over those various outreach initiatives. We have 693 committed volunteers that have committed over 2,300 on-the-ground action hours. So those action hours are either surveying in a more formal capacity, such as with us or with other partners, or actual on-the-ground plant removals. So a little bit of history on the EDRR network. We were started in 2015 as a partnership between the Ontario Invasive Plant Council and the Invasive Species Centre, and we were started thanks to funding from the Ontario Trillium Foundation. We received our second Trillium Foundation grant that moved us into Northern Ontario in 2017. So in 2015, we were focused in the Mississauga, Thunder Bay, Halton, and Peel region. And then following that grant, when we received our second, we moved into the Manitoulin, Sudbury, and Algoma catchment of OTF. And that wrapped up in August of 2019. This April 2020, we were approved for a third Ontario Trillium Foundation grant that will allow us to expand into Eastern Ontario. So we're extremely grateful for the Ontario Trillium Foundation's continued support of this program. This was our previous expansion into Sudbury, Manitoulin, and Algoma catchment. And so now we're looking to replicate this project into Eastern Ontario using our established model that I'll talk about in a couple slides. So some of the network, this was over 2 years, and some of the accomplishments that we achieved in 2 years, some of the more notable ones was we had 5,900 people participating in ecosystem conservation and restoration efforts within the catchment. Our goal was 500 people, so we exceeded it 1,099% higher than what we had expected, which was really awesome. We saw over 632 volunteer action hours in Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie alone. And as well in Sudbury, when we did our baseline survey and our follow-up 2 years later, we saw an 8% increase in people participating in invasive species volunteer opportunities, and that was a randomized survey. So those are pretty great outcomes. In the city of Sudbury, we established 10 new community partners, which has been really great, continuing our success once the grant had finished. So this introduction webinar is our first step into our new expansion. So under our new grant, our focus area will be the Kingston, Rideau, and Quinte area of the Ontario Trillium Foundation's catchment. So typically in the past, we would hold face-to-face open houses with local organizations to help gauge interest and introduce the program. But this year, due to circumstances, we've moved to a digital introduction as our kickoff. So we're very thankful for so many organizations being present today, because this is really important first step in introducing ourselves and seeing how we can work together. So it's a little bit different than what we're typically used to, but and I'd also like to point out that the catchment is Kingston, Rideau, and Quinte, but the EDRR network is an Ontario network. And so while that is our focus, kind of boots on the ground area, of course, we're always interested in partnerships outside of the catchment as well. So there's some opportunities there. This here depicts our model for the EDRR network moving into a new area. I mentioned we had our pilot areas of Mississauga, Halton, Peel, Thunder Bay, and Sault Ste. Marie. Those were our initial areas. And then when we moved out of those areas, we moved into the Sudbury, Algoma, and Cochrane area, and Manitoulin. And this is the model that we use. And so we've seen some really great success with it. And we're actually in this phase right here. So we're currently in phase 1 of our expansion into Eastern Ontario, where we engage partners to assess needs, generate ideas, and ensure that there's no duplication of efforts. The goal here is to create a self-sustaining network of volunteers. That's organizations, community members, industry. As I mentioned, we work with everyone. So to carry on and engage in invasive species detection, monitoring, and response, so that it can thrive even after the EDRR program has completed in that area. And we use this model as a way to do that. I always like to touch on the example of Thunder Bay. When we moved to Thunder Bay, we did a lot of outreach, education, training, and we wanted to instill a stewardship opportunity as well for volunteer invasive species removals. It was discovered that garlic mustard was found in McVicker Creek, and after a delineation survey, it was one of the only localized large populations, and we wanted to instill volunteers to train them how to remove it and then actually have on-the-ground action. So we did that for a few years while we were in Thunder Bay, but when the grant had completed and we had moved out of physically boots on the ground being in the Thunder Bay area, organizations that were trained in that area took on that initiative so that the garlic mustard pull wouldn't kind of fall to the wayside once the EDRR program was out. And we see that as a huge success. It's still happening to this day. The management is almost completely eradicated. And so it's a huge success of the partners feeling competent and able to take on this new task without EDRR physically being in the area, but still always there as for support and to help keep the sustainability of the program. So we're hoping that we can keep this model going throughout lots of different communities in Ontario. The scope of our events this year will be a little bit different given the current circumstances, but I did want to highlight some of our past events to help you and your organization start thinking about how you could be interested in joining in. So there's an opportunity here to get a little bit creative with how we do our education and outreach under these current circumstances, and I think that's where we'd really like to hear from you as well to help us. So these are just kind of a baseline of what we've done in the past, but there's lots of opportunities for new and exciting outreach. So I'll just quickly go over some of the examples. With our collaboration across borders with Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, we did a Lake Huron European frogbit volunteer survey where we had people out in kayaks doing surveys for frogbit. They were managing it on the American side, but we weren't managing it on the Canadian side because it was in a bit of a remote area. So we did some surveying with volunteers. We do training with Ontario Parks to help their staff detect new invasive species. Here they're training for a hemlock woolly adelgid detection. This is the garlic mustard pull team from the last year that we were there in 2017. We do workshops. For example, here's our aquatic invasive species workshop we held in Sault Ste. Marie. And as well, we did more targeted land managers, HWA, Hemlock Woolly Adelgid training a couple years ago. We've worked with Scouts Canada in the past to help us with our with some training, and then also do some garlic mustard pulls as well. Garlic mustard you'll hear quite a bit from our past work because it's a really great stewardship opportunity, but also a really important species to manage. So it's one that everyone can participate in, but it actually has really important, it affects a lot of species at risk, and it's one of Ontario's worst forest invasives. So we like to use garlic mustard as one of our stewardship opportunities. We've done a lot of, we did a lot of work with training on Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, as you can see, another example, and we also do in-field aquatic invasive species workshops or plant workshops or forest insects workshops, as well presentations such as here we presented at the Northern Ontario First Nations Environmental Conference. These are just a couple examples of some of the past outreach that we've conducted. So what can you expect from us? We have a couple webinars planned. We have, there could be opportunities for removal events or volunteer opportunities. We'll host workshops as well as our youth summit. We produce outreach materials and help disseminate outreach materials. We, in conjunction with the Ontario Invasive Plant Council, produce best management practices. There's opportunity for site tours, presentations, and resource sharing between partners. So whether that's hard copy resources or digital resources, information, linking us to concerned citizens, things like that. And that's just to highlight some of our main initiatives. So following this webinar, we're going to be sending out a survey. It's a pretty quick survey to all the organizations that we identified in the area prior to our kickoff. And we're hoping that you can help disseminate that survey even further. But the idea here is it's going to go out with the follow-up email for the webinar. As well, it's going to also include the webinar recording. And we're hoping that we can help identify some potential local partnerships with your organization or organizations that you think would be interested in participating in the network, highlighting some gaps of invasive species knowledge and resources that are in this area, identifying species and areas of concern for your region. So on this webinar, I know we might get a lot of specific areas, specific questions, but if it doesn't get captured, there's an opportunity here to identify where you feel like invasive species gaps are existing, and that will be in the survey. As well, we're going to make sure that we want to make sure that the network is as useful to your organizations and Eastern Ontario as possible. So while we, of course, have a couple ideas going in of what species we would like to cover off, especially in the early detection vein, we also want to hear from you about what your concerns are or what gaps you see, whether it's outreach gaps or physical best management practice gaps, things like that. So again, just please feel free to disseminate this survey once you receive it in your email to anyone in Eastern Ontario that would like to contribute their ideas to this initiative. I like to touch on our Sudbury introduction webinar. It wasn't a webinar at the time, it was an in-person meeting, but it followed the exact same idea as this webinar here, where we introduce the network and then ask for feedback. So the interesting part about Sudbury, when we moved in initially, we held our open house with different levels of government, organizations, a couple members of the public, and some First Nations representatives. And when we were there and we asked, where are the needs for this area, it was sort of unanimous that the needs were aquatic invasive species, which was really interesting, and it really helped us form our first workshops, our initial outreach, and so on. So no, we didn't just do aquatics, of course, for the entire duration of our time there, but it was a really great opportunity to have some focus for especially how can we meet the needs right away. And so that was a really important meeting that we had, and we're sort of hoping that this will follow along those same lines. Maybe it won't be a specific area or taxa of concern, but we're really hoping to gauge kind of where the need is from those survey results. So really important that you fill out the survey after the webinar. To learn more about the EDRR network, you can check out our newly revamped invasivespeciescentre.ca/EDRR page. And here you can also sign up to join the EDRR mailing list, and this will give you notifications on upcoming events happening in Eastern Ontario. And so here you can see our website, and if you don't, you can either go to invasivespeciescentre.ca/EDRR, or you can just click on our main page to the EDRR page. You can also reach out to the network to help connect you with and your organization to existing resources that are available. So this is resources from us and our partners. Like, for example, Vicki mentioned the best management practices, technical management bulletins, which were produced by EDRR in 2017, the Grow Me Instead guides, our fact sheet series at the Invasive Species Centre, which cover what is the invasion curve, which I mentioned at the beginning, climate change, species at risk, and municipal assets. So if any of those are of interest to you, we can link you to those as well. And that's another example of resource dissemination. If you'd like copies of those, we can send them out as well. I also just wanted to take a second to highlight that the next webinar upcoming as part of our Invasive Species Centre webinar series is very relevant to Eastern Ontario. It's titled Forests Under Attack, the History, Dispersal, and Management of Gypsy Moth. And this is happening on August 18th at 11 a.m. It'll be moderated by myself, and it will be with speaker David Dukavich from the Invasive Species Centre. So you can register for this by going to invasivespeciescentre.ca if you're interested in learning more. This will be as part of the EDRR program, and I know it's a pressing issue in Eastern Ontario. So if you're interested in that, you can visit the invasivespeciescentre.ca. We also do have some outreach items already in the works, including some upcoming EDRR-specific webinars this summer. These dates have yet to be determined, as we really wanted to make sure we had a good understanding of where the interest and gaps are before digging into our outreach for Eastern Ontario. So I really recommend joining our mailing list if you're interested in keeping up to date on events happening. To get notifications on these upcoming events, you can just go to invasivespeciescentre.ca/EDRR. And lastly, if you're interested in signing up for other invasive species news or interested in any of the other programs offered, you can sign up on our website for quarterly newsletters, bi-weekly media research and event scans, where we feature media related to invasive species, new and upcoming research, and ours and partner events happening around Ontario and Canada. And you can also sign up for event and webinar invitations outside of just EDRR as well. And you can do that by visiting the website. So with that, we're now going to have some time, a good chunk of time, to answer any questions from the question box. Jim and Vicki, as I mentioned, will be joining us for the question period. So if your question is directed to a specific person or organization, please just specify that in your question. So I'm just going to give it a second and let some questions come in. Okay, I see a couple questions are coming in already. This is great. Okay, great. So the first question that we have, it's from Eric, and it says, I recommend a webinar on how to effectively use EDMAPs, especially on how to submit a record of an unknown organism or to retrieve records and range maps from the system, both on phones and computers. So I can touch on this one really quickly. EDMAPS Ontario is the specific app that we use for our training here in Ontario at the EDRR network, as well as at the Invasive Species Centre. This program is really user-friendly and important for us. It's our call to action at every single event that we host for EDRR. Our call to action is report invasive species. One of the webinars that we've done in the past on EDRR, which you can find if you email me, it's a Canadian Institute of Forestry webinar that we held back in May, and it was on citizen science and invasive species. So So if you're interested in a walkthrough on EDMAP specifically, I really recommend checking out Chuck Bergeron's webinar that he held for the Canadian Institute of Forestry. It would be available on their page for member login, but because it was an Invasive Species Centre sponsored event, we also have access to the recordings as well. It will be also included in the Invasive Species Centre's newsletter, this upcoming newsletter. So I check out our website as well. But there is a recording of where Chuck goes through and really explains how EDMAPS works. But it's definitely something that we always include in all of our training as a how to use EDMAPS for both phone and computer. And in the past, we've also held demonstrations on how to physically use it in the field. So really, really great, great recommendation and something that we're going to keep continuing definitely. Anyone have anything to touch on, Jim or Vicky?
Well, that's fine.
Yeah, I do not.
Okay, great. The next question comes in from Eileen. What is being done to eliminate early patches of Phragmites? So this is an excellent question. Here in Sault Ste. Marie, when we were, and I can speak for the Sault Ste. Marie area, and anyone else can chime in, but here in Sault Ste. Marie, we are funding for the Algoma Manitoulin Sudbury catchment. We were working with partners at the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to do surveying for Phragmites, as well as training for the Ministry of Transportation Ontario. So that was part of one of the main surveys that we did through EDRR was surveying for invasive Phragmites, because we do have native Phragmites here as well. We were surveying for invasive Phragmites, and so there's an opportunity there to maybe partnership with local MTOs or municipalities for invasive Phragmites if that's a highlighted large concern for the area. Okay. All right, so that answered that. Next question. This is great news. Thank you. Well, thank you, Rob. The Nature Conservancy of Canada controls invasive plants and shrubs on its Eastern Ontario properties, which are held as high-value habitat for flora and fauna. Is there an opportunity for NCC to work with EDRR and local communities to address invasives on adjacent public and private lands, i.e. landowner management plans? Thanks. Yeah, I can answer this one. So yes, definitely. Any opportunity that is available to us in the new area, we would love to check out. So I think NCC makes a definite fit, and we have worked with them, and I'm sure other organizations have too, through the Invasive Species Centre. And so that's one of the examples of a perfect fit. If there's known areas or sites or landowners that are having concerns, we can definitely link them to the EDRR network, myself, Vicky, or Jim, and we can work together to create management plans, or in the case of if it's on public land and there's a stewardship opportunity for removal, we can potentially have that as a site for stewardship. Okay. From a community engagement perspective, what types of products do you suggest? Do you want to speak for Eastern Ontario specifically, Jim or Vicky?
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, from a community engagement perspective, what types of products do you suggest?
Well, two products come to mind. One is the webinar, so to reach a broad audience. Obviously, if it wasn't for the current situation, we would have face-to-face, and that may be an option in the future. The second product would be the resources that we either have in-house right now in the Invasive Species Centre or through the other organizations, or through the survey identifying some gaps in information. So I think those would be the two products that help to engage communities.
Yeah, and I think it's going to depend what species end up coming out as priorities, but some things could be promoting, sending flyers or having something online where people can download specific information about invasive species that become priorities. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the current climate with coronavirus will impact this, but hopefully we will be able to do some kind of in-person as well, some kind of workshop.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's another important outcome we're hoping for from the webinar as well, is opportunities to get a little bit creative with how we do our education and outreach, when in the past it has been a lot of face-to-face. We didn't really do webinars or digital outreach yet. Now we're seeing kind of the benefits of hosting the webinars and training, but I'm also hoping that maybe some ideas from organizations about how you are engaging with people in this different climate. So looking forward to maybe some opportunities there as well. Okay, great. And I think, Vicki, this one you'll be the best person to answer. I'm curious on the difference between the Invasive Species Councils and the Canadian Council on Invasive Species. When I'm thinking about partnering, trying to figure out how the two organizations fit.
Yeah, that's a great question. The Canadian Council of Invasive Species covers sort of a broad umbrella representing all the different invasive species councils in Canada. And so they deal with on sort of a high level national outlook, whereas Invasive Species Centre is more focused on Sault Ste. Marie. And I know you guys do have a few things that are national as well, but by and large, the focus has been more on kind of an Ontario scale.
Yeah, okay. And next question. Yeah, I guess, sorry, just to touch on that. Yeah, what Vicki said is correct. And at the Invasive Species Centre, we do work on a national scale and international scale, especially with our ICASE, our International Conference of Aquatic Invasive Species. But our primary focus for the majority of our projects is the kind of that Ontario-wide focus, all taxa, and as well a focus on diagnostic services as well, so zooplankton and insect diagnostic services as well, and we house the Asian Carp Canada program as well. Okay, great. Moving to the next question. So the next question that we have, part of your project is providing landowners with information and help to manage invasive species. Working in Eastern Ontario now, is there an opportunity to compile a list of companies that can be hired to assist with invasive species management in this area of Ontario? Really great question. And I think, Vicki, you can probably talk about the OIPC's work with the herbicide applicator list and things like that.
Yeah, we do have a list right now that kind of covers all of Ontario. So that would be definitely a great start that we could, we have some in the Eastern Ontario, and I definitely know the list could be expanded to include more people. So that's definitely possible. I think one thing we were looking at was also, because the list is sort of just general, but there was some talk about getting more specific in terms of the individual training different companies have, because it's quite varied and there's not a lot of sort of consistency. So just getting more of a sense of having a list, but also what kind of training does each of these different landscape companies have.
Okay, great. This next question, landowners who participate in either the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program or the Conservation Land and Tax Incentive Program are already those engaged landowners. So the suggestion here is that we should be working with the MNRF to get the news out about the Eastern EDRR through their distribution lists, because in his experience, there's been a lot of landowners who want to learn and help and report, but just don't know who to contact. So I think the first point I'll mention is that the EDRR program does receive some support from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. So they're very supportive of the program and the network, and are one of our greatest environment or government partners that we do training for throughout all of Ontario. So we do have a pretty close partnership with them, and they're a pretty big champion to the program. And so we're hoping to just extend that even further out in Eastern Ontario using some of the models we've used with the MNRF in the past. So definitely a really good point, and something that we do have on our outreach is to work directly with the MNRF. And we do a lot of work, like I said, here in the Soo, the goal was training for different levels of staff, but also surveying. And so with Eastern Ontario, we will be in touch and we'll work through that kind of phase one of the model like we talked about earlier, and work to see to make sure we're not duplicating efforts and to make sure we're projecting the messaging far of that EDRR is here and available. So really great suggestion.
I'd like to add to that. That's a good question. And also, I think there's another opportunity relative to private landowners connecting with them, and that is through the Ontario Woodlot Association and their local chapters in Eastern Ontario. And I think they'd be more than happy to get the word out of the EDR project, as well as the resources that are available and the opportunities for education. So good question, and we should add OWA to that.
Awesome, yeah, definitely. There's a question regarding OTF and Parks Canada and their work specifically controlling the spread of Phragmites. And the question is, do we work with organizations like MTO and Parks Canada? And the question is yes. The answer is yes. In the past, we have worked with Parks Canada as well as MTO here in the Sault Ste. Marie area. I mentioned Sault Ste. Marie a lot, mainly because we are located here, but more so that it was for the last, since 2015, it has been a priority catchment for EDRR, in addition to our many other catchments that we've been in. It's been a constant catchment. So we do a lot of work in the Sault Ste. Marie area. But we do have partnerships with both Parks Canada and MTO. But in Eastern Ontario, we would like to further that expansion of those partnerships. So there's some opportunities there for training, education, and outreach. It's definitely an avenue that we're interested in exploring for sure. That is it for the questions that have come into the chat box, and we're almost at the end of our time. If you have any last minute questions, if you can just, oh, I got one more, awesome. Is there a good source to access research findings on the status of or evolving trends with specific invasive species in Canada? Where are, for example, dog strangling vine and Phragmites spread and existing control efforts? Maybe does anyone else have anything before I add?
Could you just repeat the question?
Sure. So is there a good source to access research findings on the status or evolving trends with specific species in Ontario? So for example, dog strangling vine or Phragmites spread and existing control efforts. I think my recommendation right off the bat, there's a couple different sources on the Invasive Species Centre website. We have our risk assessment database. And so this is a database where you can access risk assessments from Canada and the US. And it's a constantly updated database. If you had anything to add from your organizations for invasive species risk assessments, you can send them our way. So that's one of the sites where I'd recommend reaching out if you're interested in learning about the risk assessment of a certain species. As well, as far as existing control methods and efforts, the best management practices that Vicki mentioned are a really great resource for assessing your invasive species concerns based on your plot size, based on season, things like that are all in those best management practices. So I really recommend checking those out. And we are hoping in partnership to create a couple more. Does anyone else have anything to add?
I recommend looking at the best management practices, and those are things we're looking at updating on a regular basis. So any new findings would be updated or posted on our website.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, that's all the questions that we have in the question box today. But as a reminder, there's going to be a survey disseminated after. Once we get the recording up on YouTube, we will be sending out the survey with the recording link. If you can fill out that survey, it would really help us in kind of gauging where the interest is or where the gaps are. As well, there's an opportunity to submit more questions for follow-up or book specific one-on-one meetings and things like that. So if anyone else has anything to say, I think we can stop there. So look out in your emails for the survey and the webinar recording, and please feel free to disseminate to anyone who's interested. I want to take an opportunity to thank Jim and Vicki for joining, and to thank you all for joining us today. We really look forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to potentially working together. And with that, We'll end and have a great rest of your day.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.